So I recently ran some PHP benchmarking tests on a few servers that I have access to. Each of these servers are different from each other, and that way I can make some good concrete conclusions on how each server stacks against each other. Now, I always had a conclusion that IIS servers tend to run PHP slower than an Apache server, but never had specific concrete evidence of my own. So running the PHP benchmarking test would allow me to make some solid conclusion. I'll also include the download link in the description below of the benchmarking tests that I've used. Here are the specs of the 4 different environments. The first one is a MacBook Air, the early 2015 model, and it has a Core i5 5250U with 4 GB of RAM. The second environment is a Windows 10 machine. It has a Core i7 2600 at 2.8 GHz, and it sports a 8 GB RAM. Now the Windows 10 machine is faster CPU-wise than the MacBook Air. Just wanted to point that out. The third environment is an Azure environment. That's Microsoft's cloud-based hosting, and it is the standard tier. And then finally, the Linux environment is a standard shared hosting at a major hosting provider. Nothing special about that. So those are the 4 environments that I've ran the PHP benchmarking tests on. So here are the 4 benchmarked results on the 4 environments. The first one in the top left is the shared hosting. That's the Linux platform. And then next to it, top right, is the Darwin platform. So that's the MacBook Air. Lower left is the Windows NT Azure. And last is the lower right, and that's the local Windows 10 machine. And they are in the order from top left to bottom right in the order of quickness. So as you can see, the shared hosting, the Linux box, performed overall at a 2.9 second. The MacBook ran everything in 4.8. The Azure ran everything at 11.9. And finally, the Windows 10 machine ran everything at 15.5. So kind of to put things in perspective, the Linux platform, which is the shared hosting, it is, and then compare it to the MacBook Air, which is the second fastest. The MacBook Air is actually 1.6 times slower than the Linux machine. And then from the MacBook to the Azure environment, the Azure cloud environment, the Azure cloud environment is 2.5 times slower, or the MacBook Air is 2.5 times quicker. And then finally, from the Azure platform, the Azure environment to the local Windows machine, the local Windows machine is 1.3 times slower. If we're going to compare hosting to hosting, the Linux shared hosting is 4 times faster than Azure. So that's quite a big difference. Especially how cheap the shared hosting for the Linux environment is versus the Azure standard tier. And then if we were going to take the fastest and compare it to the slowest, which would be the shared hosting, which is the Linux platform, versus the local Windows machine running IIS 10, well, the Windows IIS 10 is 5.36 times slower than the Linux machine. So that's quite a difference. As you can see from the benchmarks, they are all running PHP 7 plus. Try to get it as close as possible to the exact same PHP version, but they are all running PHP 7, so that they are close enough. So this is the conclusion of the first benchmark. The second benchmark will go into more details to see specifically what's causing the Microsoft IIS platforms to be much slower than Linux and the Mac, which are pretty close together. The Mac is a variant of Linux, based on what I heard, and they both run Apache versus IIS. As we can see, the specs for the most part are pretty close between the Linux and Mac versus the Windows, except for the string manipulation functions. That's where the biggest difference is. So in the second benchmark, we can take a little bit in closer detail of what string manipulation core PHP functions are slowing things down on the Windows side. So these are the stats for the second benchmark test that I ran. So here are the benchmark stats for the second benchmark that I ran. The first column, the first set of results is the Linux. The second one is the Mac. The third one is Azure, and the fourth one is the Windows box. And as you can see, towards the bottom, you'll see URL decode, which is the third one from the bottom. For the Linux machine, it can run the decode test in half a second, while for Azure, it takes almost 7.6 seconds, and then in the Windows box, it runs it in 5.14 seconds. So surprisingly, Azure is slower than my Windows box in terms of URL decode. I think the biggest difference is the string to upper and string to lower functions. It's towards the bottom. While the Linux machine can run the string to upper in literally 0.2 of a second, it takes Azure almost 8 seconds, 7.7 seconds to run the string to upper. And then for the Windows box, it takes 5.229. But here you can see that a lot of the string manipulation PHP core functions, or the PHP native functions, are what's making the Windows machine choke. The string to upper, the string to lower, URL decode, the numbers format, and the sprintf functions. Those are the ones that are really slowing things down. I think the biggest one is probably going to be either between the string to upper or the URL decode. So I also found it interesting that the string to upper runs a little bit slower on almost all the platforms versus the string to lower. I don't know why. I just thought that was interesting. Except for the Linux, I think it's a little bit faster. But yeah, for the other platforms, the string to upper runs a little bit slower than the string to lower. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, these are interesting PHP native functions that is bogging down the Windows servers, because string to upper and string to lower are typically used a lot. I use it pretty often when I want to do some string case insensitive comparisons. Number formats, I use that when I deal with money type currency, because the number format just makes it easier to just format money type numbers. And then URL decode, whenever you want to grab something from the URL, that's typically used to decode that. So I guess when you're on a Windows environment, you just have to find other creative solutions to work around some of these PHP native functions, and just be very cautious when using them, because they definitely will slow your site down if you host PHP apps and websites on a Microsoft environment. So in conclusion, these four environments, they're all running PHP 7. I also want to mention that the Linux and the Mac servers are not running anything special. They're not running Nginx or anything like that. The Apache is the most recent version of Apache that's available at this time. And yeah, they're all running PHP 7, and the versions are very close to each other. The biggest difference between the Linux and Mac versus the Azure and Windows environment is the string manipulation PHP native string functions. And so from share hosting to Mac, there's a 1.6 difference. Mac to Azure is 2.5. Azure to Windows is 1.3. In the worst case scenario where we're comparing the shared hosting to the local Windows box, there's a 5.36 times difference. And then from the shared hosting to the Azure Cloud Platform, there's a 4 times difference. So that's the conclusion I've came up with in terms of running my PHP benchmarks on these different environments. Hope you find this useful. Thanks.